Philanthropy and civil society have always worked in concert. And so, in this critical moment, what should philanthropy be doing? To answer this question, I'm joined by a global panel of experts today. I'm delighted to introduce Margriet van Wessel from Wageningen University and Research in the Netherlands, Glenn Galich from the Stupski Foundation in the United States, and Maria Eduarda at the Igarape Institute in Brazil. Before we jump into the conversation, I just want to give a few housekeeping notes to everyone. Please go ahead and say hello in our chat, which you should be able to see on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you can't see it, there should be a dot in the bottom right-hand corner where you can click on and you can see chat, and then you can also see a Q&A. So we'll also be doing a Q&A in the second half of our panel discussion. So as you're listening to our expert panelists, if a question comes to mind, please go ahead and pop it in the chat. And if you see a question you're very interested in, please also go ahead and upvote it. Everyone who is attending our event today is entitled to a discount on an Alliance subscription, and we will pop details of that into the chat while the event is going on. An Alliance subscription will give you access to exclusive subscriber content, 4 issues of our magazine a year, and free access to all future events. So you can find a link to and information about that in the chat, and then we will also follow up by email where we will also provide a recording of the event. So if you want to catch up on what we talked about today, or you have a colleague that registered and wasn't able to make it, there will be a playback. Now on to the main event. So I'm going to start today's discussion by turning the floor over to Margriet. I would love to hear about your experience in the Netherlands. So I think you are sitting in the middle of quite a big shift for philanthropy and civil society. The Dutch government is implementing big budget cuts for international development, as well as disincentivizing charitable donations, implementing stricter rules and oversight on civil society. Can you talk us through what's happening in the Netherlands and in Europe?
Sure, thanks a lot. So yeah, I'm here in the Netherlands, and of course I'm part of the society, have been observing the situation, and it's been a massive shock to civil society, what's been happening on the front of funding as much as constriction of civic space, or attempts to constrict civic space, I should say. A big move was the coming together of a government led by the radical right-wing party PVV, led by Geert Wilders, the only member of that organization. And a coalition government was put together last summer with that party in the lead as the largest party, and that created a lot of space for their agenda. And their agenda has been the construction of an opposition between international solidarity and national interest. So a lot of the things that the PVV has been pushing for, especially the person of Geert Wilders, through ongoing campaigning, has been this opposition. And this included doing anything with regard to multilateral interactions and engagements, refugees, the support of Ukraine, as much as development aid. And then the construction that Wilders has been pushing all the time has been any money that goes abroad is money that's stolen from our population, because we give money to refugees, because we give money for development. Our people cannot pay the rent, cannot pay for their groceries, do not have hot meals in the weekend in care homes. Constant insinuations, totally beside the fact, really also insinuating that doing away with international development would solve the problems of Dutch people who are economically in difficult positions. Yeah, and that has created an atmosphere in the Netherlands, at least in government circles, that the cutting down of international development was the way to go. And they would also be proudly announcing that they were going to slash it down. So what happened was, last summer came the announcement that development aid would be cut by a third over the coming years. And then later on, the decision was made that civil society support, and there's been this focus on advocacy in our government in recent years, that would be cut by 2/3. So yeah, it's centralizing the national right, national interest in a very zero-sum game. and it's very much about constricting a national interest to keeping things behind our borders, no sense for relations, diplomacy, collaborations, or solidarity. And yeah, so it's an onslaught to the whole principle of international solidarity. That's what I would say. So yeah, any thing that would happen on that front would be a bad idea. And there's no real discussion of government policy or development policy as such in public debate or by builders. It's basically simplification based on emotions all along. But there's also this onslaught against civil society as a force as such, much in line with the PVV's distaste for diversity and critical voices from society. So there will be a little bit of funding for civil society advocacy in the coming years, but they're, for example, not allowed to do advocacy in the Netherlands with that funding, and also only on specific topics that are decided by the government. And there have been attempts to constrict civic space in the Netherlands, logically then also connected with that approach, trying to cut back on indeed tax deductions for charity, but also trying to target certain organizations like Extinction Rebellion, organizations standing with Palestine or working on Palestine, in Palestine, certain topics like climate. But it's not just the radical right. Some other parties have also been playing that game, going along with that same direction, constriction of civic space. And that has been going on for some years, trying all sorts of things like legal measures, like the right to take the state to court, financial measures, like trying to take away this charitable status of Extinction Rebellion, trying to punish organizations that facilitate Palestine movements, police violence against protesters, trying to cut down our public broadcaster, mass surveillance. So it's a very wide range of attempts to constrict civic space. And I think that's also the most, one of the most concerning developments that we've seen, that led me and some colleagues also to write a report on these developments, to really bring into the picture all the diverse measures and attempts that have been going on, including also less tangible things that have happened, like delegitimizing and criminalizing verbally civil society. Yeah, so that's where we stand, and it's very concerning. And of course, there's a lot of panic in civil society in the Netherlands around the financial implications of what has been happening, but also the whole turn against the collaborative, more consensus-style politics that we've had for decades in the Netherlands, with a strong collaboration with civil society. So a massive turn, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And it is definitely a very sobering picture, I think, that we're starting to see unfold, not just in the Netherlands, but in other places around the world. I know you are a researcher that has focused on civil society, and you have sort of studied how these trends have unfolded in other places in the world. And I wanted to ask you specifically about the FCRA bill that passed in 2020 in India that made it much harder for international funders to work in India. Do you think that something like that is in the cards in the Netherlands or in Europe? Do you think we're going to see a movement to something that's that restrictive?
Well, FCRA is a law by which the Indian state can really control civil society in terms of the foreign funding that they can get, also the usage of that funding. It creates all sorts of requirements on civil society that they have to comply with, all kinds of stronger and stronger restrictions over the years. I don't see such a thing happening right now in the Netherlands, but definitely attempts to constrict the financing of organizations, especially organizations that are disliked. Same thing that we see in India and elsewhere. So it's very also selective, this whole civil society constricting, and looking at what our government has been trying. I'm not sure what we can expect for the future. We also see, by the way, a decline in the voter support for the PVV right now in this country. So we'll have to see. It's also not set in stone. Who knows? We can get a turn for the better. But I wouldn't be surprised if organizations like radical right parties in the Netherlands would be interested to see how the FCRA is set up and maybe try and copy that. I wouldn't be surprised, given also the tendency of autocrats to try and copy things from each other.
Yeah, thank you for that context. I think there are some ideas we'll come back to a bit later, but before we get to our Q&A, I want to hear from Glenn and then Maria. So Glenn, you're joining us today from California in the US. Quite a lot is happening in the US, especially with philanthropy and civil society, and coming after, I think, a lot of organizations that have like stated progressive values, and it's happening very quickly. And I was wondering if you can give us a dispatch from there. Are you seeing a resistance? What do you think philanthropy can do? Is civil society sort of like mobilizing itself? Just kind of paint a picture of what's happening on the ground in the States at the moment.
Well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me here. I haven't often spoken to an international audience. We speak a lot to domestic audiences. We have a podcast at the Stepsky Foundation called Break Fake Rules. And it's becoming more and more relevant as we're seeing, what some call rising autocracy in the United States. I've been paying very close attention to some of the ways that political scientists differentiate different kinds of regimes, like this one coming into fruition here in the United States. And I'm not sure you can call it, or it's going to end up being what is traditionally called a bureaucratic authoritarian state. It really is looking more like, this is very technical, jargony stuff here, but it's looking more like a patrimonial state, which means that it's being designed almost like a cult in a way, like a statewide cult around a person. And loyalty is ultimately the most important thing to this leadership, loyalty to Trump. And as a result, I've been doing a lot of studying of this. This type of regime ends up, when you're putting loyalty first, you end up getting people that are loyal, but not necessarily qualified to run the government. And this week, I think we had a really good example of that. The Secretary of Defense, whose main pedigree is that he was a talk show host on Fox News here in the United States, a conservative channel, wanted to make a public spectacle of a war effort in Yemen and put a journalist onto a feed with a whole group of top government officials as this attack took place. It was probably the greatest breach of confidentiality in government that we've seen in the secretary or in the department. And as a result, it kind of is showing the openings that do exist and could exist for opposition. Unfortunately, let me switch to that. I'm not seeing a lot of opposition right now. And I think the fact of the matter is that for the better part of 5 years, lots of networks developed to better coordinate activity at the foundation level, the funding level, we'll call it that, and then in the broader civil society. But I don't think that coordination actually came to fruition. And we're scrambling right now. A lot of us, to be very honest with you, those of us that want to put up a resistance are scrambling to figure out what we can do and what's coming at us. I kind of look at it almost like a spectrum. You see some entities that feel more vulnerable in this time, engaging in what Timothy Snyder and others have called, anticipatory compliance. People are taking action to remove language off their websites, or turning meetings that used to be more public into confidential. And yet, to this date, very few actions have been taken by the government on any of us, but people are anticipating that it could happen. And so they are kind of ducking under the table, if you will, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where people are very vocally calling out allies to do something, to do anything to resist what is happening right now. There are very real things that have happened, so I don't want to discount that. In the international sector, obviously, the closing down of USAID, the shutdown of many programs, put an immediate chilling effect on international organizations. I used to work in the human rights sector. I've spoken with people that worked in the organization or worked in or continue to stay in touch with the organization I used to work in. And there's a huge concern about how not just the direct food aid and other, or even the PEPFAR and other programs we've had for health will be affected, but even human rights. Freedom House, for example, which is a well-known international research think tank on democracy and human rights, was absolutely gutted by the government. United States, USIP, the U.S. Institute for Peace. I don't know if anyone saw this footage, but Elon Musk's team, Doge, as it's called over here, literally went to the USIP office and forced people out of the office to shut it down. So there are things happening. There have been reports of a couple of climate funders that have been visited by the FBI for engaging in fraudulent activity by deploying the Inflation Reduction Act funds that the prior administration passed for climate change. Things are happening. But broadly speaking, there's plenty of space, as I see it at least, and some may disagree with it. I'd love to hear from people on this, but there's plenty of space for us to organize and work together and engage. There are a couple of markers coming up in the future. There are 2 executive orders. So in the United States, most of how our laws are supposed to be created are through the legislature. Our legislature is completely silent and absent right now. They're not really doing anything. They're going to be negotiating a budget bill potentially for the next 4 years, trying to figure out that issue. So while that goes on, the president is passing his own laws through executive order, we call it here. So it's more of like a fiat. It doesn't hold long-term legal power. The next president can remove all these executive orders. And Trump, when he came to office, removed most of Biden's executive orders. So these will not last beyond him. But in the short term, there are 2 that we're paying close attention to. One, which is due to come to, which will be up and finalized, I guess. I don't know how to put this one, in April. He has asked all the different departments related to justice and security to bring forward ways that he can utilize what we call over here the Insurrection Act, which is an act passed many years ago. Most of these laws were passed many years ago that he's utilizing that would allow the police it would allow him to basically deputize National Guard and police to take action on protests and other movements. So he has called for a report, basically a report out from all security agencies on how to utilize the Insurrection Act. We're going to see where that goes. In May, there's an executive order that is called for all the various agencies of the White House, of the executive branch, to bring forward groups that are engaged in DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion work here in the United States. He's banned it for the most part, certainly anything related to federal activity. And so that there will be people named. I can tell you, I've made it onto a couple of watch lists. I'm keeping track. I hope I can get onto a whole bunch of them. And there are other organizations that are being pulled onto watch lists that conservative and right-wing groups are starting to surface. And then finally, one of the philanthropy media entities here in the United States did one of the most boneheaded things I've ever seen. They published 350 foundations that are engaged in DEI work in a database format on their media site. I have no idea what they were thinking, but basically the title of the article is, if you're on this list, pretty much the Trump administration might come for you. And they listed everybody. So all of these things are in the soup, if you will, of what we're seeing. And I think many of us are trying to figure out how best to prevent, protect, and respond. And unfortunately, the headline here is that I don't think we did the work we needed to be prepared for this. You could see it coming, but we didn't get prepared. So now there's a pretty significant scramble amongst different constituencies figuring out how to respond.
Thanks, Glenn. I think there's just, so much happening, so much to explore there. I'm wondering, you sort of referenced this a little bit, but are you seeing sort of some concrete efforts to mobilize resistance? Because my sense, and I'm an American, but I live in London, my sense sort of looking back home across the pond is that with this administration coming in a second time, there just doesn't seem to be as pronounced a resistance movement as there was 8 years ago. And I'm wondering, is civil society sort of trying to organize itself? Is philanthropy supporting efforts for that? Are you seeing things like that happen?
I want to approach your question in a couple of ways. I don't want to, I'm generalizing here. I don't know what everybody's doing. So I'm trying to just give you a sense of my own observation and what people have said to me. I think that the more in the public protests that you saw at the very beginning of 2017 on the first round with Trump, and of course at the time Twitter was not owned by Elon Musk, it was owned by a different group. You saw things like on Twitter, this resistance hashtag that a lot of people organized around, and you saw protests in the streets during those early days, and of course into the even into the Biden administration. My sense is that people feel that it didn't work, and may have only further strengthened Trump's hand by engaging, and if it didn't, it may have been very effective in some ways, but Trump and the media establishment around him did a great job of reframing it all as insurrectionist and not resistance. So I think that's part of the issue, is that for many of us that have worked, for example, in racial justice, which is a big part of what the Stepsky Foundation does, some of the constituencies that we thought we were supporting ended up voting for Trump. They resisted on their side the policies we were calling for. So I think in addition to figuring out how to resist, if that's the right word, there's also a recalibration of what a broader coalition of Americans want from their government. And trying to decipher that is very challenging, because some of this is a reaction to things that louder progressive voices may have put forward that were rejected, but don't necessarily represent the broader movement. And some of it may very well be impassioned support for what Trump has put forward himself. So how you design and resist and build a coalition and understand the various dynamics, for us over here, it's been, at least for the people I'm working with, it's been very confusing to figure out how to approach this at this time and how to build that broader coalition.
Yeah, thank you for that. Maria, we're going to come to you now. Last but certainly not least, I would really like to hear about the work that you are witnessing and doing in Brazil. Specifically, I think that these situations that Marhit and Glenn are talking about, civil society in Brazil was facing with President Jair Bolsonaro several years ago. And I think your civil society actually mobilized itself to resist in a way that was organized and successful to a certain degree. And I would like to hear about that experience and sort of what your organization found working with these groups. And yeah, what insights can you pass along from Brazilian civil society to the rest of the world that's now facing the situation it is facing?
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to join this conversation. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Igarapé Institute, which is an independent Brazilian think and do tank with this global mandate and reach. And our goals include proposing more innovative solutions and partnerships to address systemic global challenges, particularly in the areas of security, nature, and climate. So before discussing this current landscape for civil society in Brazil, I'd like to start with a brief, really quickly, quick overview of our recent democratic history, because Brazil came out of a military dictatorship only 40 years ago, but it still carries some lasting traces of authoritarianism, issues that have been really aggravated since the election of former Bolsonaro, President Bolsonaro in 2018. And just a quick side note, this week, Brazil's Supreme Court unanimously agreed to indict Bolsonaro for trying to stage a coup. But coming back for this context I was referring to, back in 2020, they started paying closer attention to this democratic backsliding in Brazil as part of this larger global trend that we are seeing of shrinking civic space. So we began assessing the strategies being used to constrain or even like eliminate civic action during this particular period. And to analyze these main strategies to curb civic space, we developed a typology of these strategies, and then we began to monitor these like daily attacks, and we published our findings in a quarterly bulletin called Civic Space GPS, and I can share that with you. And from 2020 to 2022, we documented over 3,000 threats to civic space. But just as importantly, we also documented almost the same amount of reaction, ranging from institutional responses to acts of resistance from civil society. And the majority of these attacks involved the dissemination of fake news and disinformation campaigns. In second place, we saw the intimidation and harassment of critics and opponents more generally, and that was followed by abuses of power. And then, like, you must be asking, how did we manage to resist a period like marked by repeated attempts to discredit NGOs, restrict freedoms of association, expression, and intimidate journalists, academics, activists more generally? And how did we prevent further democratic erosion? So even with all of these challenges, civil society managed to bring together like different parts of the government across like all the political spectrum in defense of democracy back then. So we teamed up with other sectors that shared like the same democratic values as we did and still do. But no organization relied solely on a single strategy. What really made a difference was using this mix strategies at the right moments. For example, we coordinated with other civil society organizations, and we worked really closely with like major international multilateral bodies. I can mention the European Parliament, the Organization of American States, the United Nations, of course, and conferences like the COP. And this collaboration extended to working with embassies, partnering with traditional media, but also using strategic communication on social media, and of course, advocating for more with other public bodies, especially in the legislative and the executive branches, but in the state and municipal levels. And there was also significant interaction with the judiciary, mainly through strategic litigation. And today, even as Brazil moves forward with a process of democratic reconsolidation, if I can say that, many of those risks still remain, like disinformation. We have a profound political polarization right now. And one major issue we've been observing within this philanthropic ecosystem is that in critical moments, this agenda becomes like really a priority. But often when, like in periods when it's most important to actually consolidate the progress and then prepare for the next crisis, this agenda loses like visibility, loses support. And that's what's happening right now. Like, for example, between 2020 and 2022, we ran, as I said, a really strong and effective civic space program with very tangible outcomes. Like, we launched a successful campaign. We published an agenda with very concrete proposals to strengthen civil society, ranging from expanding public participation to ensuring access to information and restoring the democratic purpose of our own institutions. We invested time in actually producing information to raise public awareness. We engaged in strategic litigation. We collaborated with local governments. We built really unlikely alliance, and then we participated on what we call discreet diplomacy, and that was very comprehensive and impactful, actually. But once the political situation changed, and the most urgent threats started to calm down, we feel that support from philanthropy faded like really fast. And of course, we continue to address civic space, but now in a more transversal way, embedded across all of our program areas in like climate, nature, security, and but still, I think it's important to recognize that defending civic space and democracy is not a task reserved only for times of crisis. Like it really requires like a daily commitment, and that's why we really need like philanthropy to step up, not only by providing this more flexible funding, but also offering like long-term strategic support to actually ensure the sustainability, the resilience that we need for more impact of civil society organization. And coming to a closure, I'd like to highlight like some, I would say 3 key lessons that we learned from our personal experience, like the Brazilian experience. First, mapping and monitoring really matter. Like tools like our civic space GPS helped turn this more scattered evidence into really actionable data. And that was key to mobilizing public and institutional responses. Second, coalitions are really powerful. Like resistant efforts were most effective when they were cross-sectoral, and civil society joined forces with journalists, academics, lawyers, private sector, and others. And third, as I already said, philanthropy must be bold and really responsive. Like in moments of democratic decline, support must go beyond like single specific projects. We need more flexibility, long-term, and they need to be more rooted in trust. So I'll end up here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. So much that's really interesting from the work that your institute is doing and also from your recommendations. I wanted to ask you about, so during this period where you were saying that there were a lot of attacks on civil society, but also a lot of support for civil society, how was philanthropy like best supporting civil society so that it could be like as effective as possible and sort of weather this period of like strong attacks? Like what was really working well in terms of like, I know you were mentioning sort of like flexible funding and long-term commitments and things like that. Are there other things that sort of the funding sector was doing for Brazilian civil society in that moment that you felt like went a long way in terms of like protecting Brazilian civil society from attacks?
Sure. Well, I will mix a little bit what I think they should have done and things that they actually did and it worked out. So first, I think we had a support for like political education and digital literacy to really strengthen democratic values and like counter this polarization. We had a lot of campaigns trying to bring attention to things, especially related to the electoral system. That was like the main source of this information back then. So we saw a lot of campaigns trying to bring awareness and also update and have data to update society about these democratic attacks more broadly. And I think also important, we saw this fund for more proactive infrastructure like digital monitor team. I would mention Democracy in Check. It's a really nice organization that was monitoring these attacks in like social media daily, and also with strategic communication plans, like more legal support networks. And lastly, I would say back more preventive scenario planning and risk analysis to kind of try to anticipate this autocratic shifts and mitigate threats and actually protect the people. Like we had our own program to protect the environmental defenders. And I think that's really, really important. Like even to invest in mental health and institutional resilience, because during these periods of hostility and misinformation, it's really important to take care of the people that are really doing the work in the front and that are being like attacked in a daily basis.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think a lot to be learned from the situation in Brazil. We're going to jump into our Q&A now. So just a reminder to our audience, if you have a question for our panelists, we have a Q&A tab that you should be able to get to. There's a ... in the bottom right-hand corner. If you click on that, I think you should be able to see Q&A. It just helps me follow the questions because sometimes they get jumbled up in the chat. But yeah, I want to address this first question to Margit. So there are a couple people that are asking about sort of organized pushback and mobilizing of civil society in the Netherlands. So Barbara Ibrahim says, given the long history of Dutch government aid and strong civil society organization, is there any organized pushback emerging against the drastic changes in policy and funding? And somebody else, Federica, asks something similar. How can European civil society mobilize to protect itself? So I'm going to put those to you.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, good questions. What we first saw with the NGOs, the civil society in X sector in development, when they learned about the cutbacks, their basic situation was shock. And since then, they have also been grappling with how to survive as organizations, right? There are going to be massive layoffs and restructuring of organizations that have been around for decades. So that is, I think, something they're very occupied with. And I do think that we've seen a little bit of a shift in the sense that first, I think organizations were trying to salvage what was possible with the new minister, trying to see if they could maybe save some of the funding, focused on their survival. So we haven't seen since then a stronger pushback across the board, but little by little we do see some more vocal protest against it from organizations, more vocal pushback from singular organizations in the development sector. So it's understood now that there's not much more left to save, I think, and it's time to push back and show that it's awful what's happening, and try also to show that to the rest of society. But I don't think we see yet much of alliance formation, and I think we should expand the discussion then also to other sections of civil society, including philanthropy and the activist sectors, you could say, social movements, organizations. I think we see a lot of coming together amongst themselves in these separate sectors. So I've been part of get-togethers and initiatives with these different groups, as I straddle as an academic these different categories, you could say, and I see they still act very separately. So there's not much yet of a broad alliance developing, which is what Maria Eduarda has been saying is actually really important. And another thing that I also would like to stress, also in relation to what Glenn has been saying, and also what we know about pushing back against autocracy, it's in the early stages that there's still a lot that can be saved. The more this progresses, the harder it becomes. So the more the space the civil society gets constricted, the harder it becomes to actually respond effectively. So I would urge everybody really to get together at an early stage and see what is the common threat that you can identify. You have a lot of differentiation, that's fine, but what's the common ground? And it doesn't have to cover all ground. But what I now see in Dutch society is too much of separation and not much recognition of the threat that we all share, and also not much recognition of the force of coalition building. And what I also see is that in society, there does not seem to be a lot of awareness of the threat to civic space in the Netherlands. Right? There's debate in the newspapers, there is debate among civil society actors, but we don't see pushback from political parties or within the media broadly, any recognition really of that this could be a threat to our democracy that we should stand and stop now, right? That is, I think, something we need. So I would urge everybody in Dutch civil society to think what the possibilities are to become more united and more also communicative towards the Dutch society, which I think is really not aware of this. And not seeing also the common interest that we have in democracy. We have a situation where there's very much, I think, a discussion still in terms of right and left, right? You are either on the right or you are on the left. That's how the rightists construct, yeah, and also the leftists for a part, the situation. Whereas this is really an attack against democracy. It's not a left-right issue, and I think it would start there. We also do not have much of citizenship education in this country, which I think is a huge mistake. And I think the day to start with that is now, March 28, 2025.
Thank you, Marhit. I think I'm thinking also a lot of, Maria, what you were mentioning earlier of there's a lot of mobilization in times of crisis, and then when the crisis is not perceived or not perceived as being there, things just sort of dissipate. And I just, Alliance has recently done some work on looking back at what philanthropy did with COVID. And that was a lot of what we heard from our partners was, 5 years ago, there was a big movement and there was a lot of support, and now it dissipated. And I think we see that as well with threats to civil society. But I'm actually I'm gonna move on. Glenn, I'm gonna put this next question to you. It comes from Michael Gabriel in the chat. So he says, regarding the anti-DEI executive order and the follow-on memo by Pam Bondi criminalizing DEI, what is the impact on how foundations are pre-complying and pausing on giving NGOs that have a DEI policy?
So also there's another question about the article I mentioned with the 346 foundations listed in. I just posted that link. Of course, I do that very reluctantly because a lot of peers are in that list. I know people should be aware of this stuff. It's embarrassment. There is no general response at the moment, I'll say. I just can't reiterate that enough. I'll speak for the Stupski Foundation. We have made no changes to anything in our work related to racial justice. I'm not really, this DEI question, at least, I'm very aware of how we approach DEI at the foundation and how many of our peers have approached it. We've really focused more on the justice and equity aspects of it, and certainly the inclusion aspect of it. What the administration has done is posted a whole bunch of words that we're not supposed to use anymore. I think even woman is in there. So I don't know. It's just very difficult to figure out how they're using this, I think, as a cover to basically take retribution on organizations that haven't supported him as a person. Again, back to that more patrimonial model. That's where they seem to be going. But some foundations are certainly backing away from these issues. I'm aware of the Zuckerberg Foundation and the Skoll Foundation, and both very prominent foundations in the United States have backed away from their DEI and racial justice programs. In fact, Skoll, as I understand it, may have backed away from their full democracy program. Those are ones that are more public. I can't speak to those that are less public. And it's not only the foundations, there are a lot of nonprofits as well that are pulling down language from their websites. They're hearing from their lawyers that they should be really careful about all of this. Again, because we weren't, I think for many of us, we were caught, unfortunately, flat-footed when these threats started to surface as the administration was coming into power and then took power. I just saw a lot of different entities kind of scrambling to different people to get advice on how to prepare, protect, and approach these threats. And I'm not sure we went to the right people. You kind of go to your regular attorneys who've been helping you with your bylaws or something. They don't know anything about how to handle this. So as attorneys can be, they become very risk averse, and they tell you to do all kinds of things to protect yourself that may or may not be relevant or necessary. And as more and more people are doing that, I'm speaking only from the foundation sector here, as more and more players do that, you start to see best practices forming, what we call fake rules, essentially, that people start to follow. They're not actual rules, they're not actual laws. People start, speaking to each other, and these rules start to become established as almost like they are laws. But, I can tell you, we agreed internally and externally that we weren't going to change anything. If they want to talk to us about it, I still point to the First Amendment of the United States Constitution that says we have the right to say what we want to say. And I welcome any kind of challenge to that by the government. What the president is telling us is that he's a strong believer in free speech. He spent quite a bit of time in his State of the Union address just a few weeks ago saying what a strong believer in free speech they are. We stand by him on that. If he's a believer in free speech, then he has no reason to talk to us about our website. And I'd say the same to any other foundation out there. And that goes, I know the question is around policy and funding. I would hope that more foundations step into that space and instead of stepping back and retreating. I just take great hope from hearing what Maria had to share in Brazil and how organizations and philanthropy found ways to push back in productive ones. And one thing you said, Maria, that really, really resonates with me, and I'm not seeing it right now. And I frankly don't know how we foster it. So maybe we have a phone call in the future. But to hear you say we came out with a plan, with a set of policies or a set of programs that we wanted to see, a statement of what the world we want to see as progressives or as anti-autocrats, that has not surfaced yet from the left. We are very much in defensive mode and have been for a long time. The general statement of the left, in my opinion, again, this is just my opinion, others can certainly disagree, has been, we are not them. We are not them, has been our message. And it's not a proactive message. And that's mostly at the political level, at the party level and the political level. But at the movement level, there are lots of ideas out there about what a better future could be for people in the United States and beyond. And that hasn't surfaced as a clear platform upon which we can all mobilize. And that needs to happen. And to hear that that was a part of the strategy in Brazil is very educational and informative. And I would hope that we go in that direction instead of worrying so much about what's coming at us all the time. We should, obviously. There are real threats here. I'm not denying that. I'm not at all denying it. But I think we need to stand on something and stand for something. And that, to me, is absent in a coordinated way at the moment.
Thanks, Glenn. Maria, I want to come to you to talk more about your work supporting civil society in Brazil. So Brazil, I think, as everyone knows, is hosting COP at the end of this year, and I'm wondering what your institute is doing to support climate civil society to be able to support the work of COP and sort of advance, the climate agenda there, and what that's looking like. Can you share a little bit about that?
And thank you for your question. So we feel that there is this growing momentum to ensure really meaningful participation in climate action this year. And we see that Brazilian civil society groups are really trying to leverage this momentum to mobilize efforts ahead of the COP itself. And I would like to highlight one of the key high-level objectives that the ambassador Andrea Correia do Lago, the president designated for COP30, that he shared. It's an important call to action for a multirão spirit. And this concept of multirão comes from Brazil's indigenous peoples and refers to community coming together to work on a shared task, whether it is like building something together or supporting on one another. And I think that in this letter, our leadership has set the tone to truly invite the international community to join Brazil in this global multirão against climate change. And we believe that this COP could be a game changer in terms of collective and really collaborative mobilization across all sectors. And civil society groups, they are already working together across sectors to respond this urgency, this like global challenge. And I think this united front is really essential for the implementation of effective climate action. And just a quick side note, I don't know if you know that, but today marks the 30th anniversary of the COP. It has been like three decades since COP1 in Berlin. And 30 years after like this inauguration, I think it's pretty clear that we must set aside our differences and engage in this call to action for a global multirão against climate change. And we are already seeing a few fronts emerging as top priorities. I would say beyond this call to action, there is this emphasis on implementation and the climate urgency. So there is this strong focus on moving from commitments to action. And civil society is really pushing for more concrete measures, to be like really implemented now. Particularly those that respond to the social and environmental challenges already impacting Brazil and the global South more broadly. And I would say that the second priority would be like fight against disinformation. So I see a lot of organizations trying to prioritize this dissemination of more clear science-based information, really tackling misinformation, especially on the climate and environmental topics. So I think that's really critical for building public understanding and political will as well. And I think Brazil is a real leader in promoting social participation. We saw that during the G20 mandate, Brazil has been like positioned as a really good example of ensuring this broad-based engagement. So we saw civil society participating in the G20 social process as a really model for more inclusive dialogue. And we want to replicate this and expand this spirit of participation at COP30. And lastly, I think it's important to mention that we are really trying to expand the spaces for civil society during COP30. So we are seeing these organizations, including us, trying to organize some like panels and meetings beyond the official blue and green zones areas. And so we want to create these alternative spaces. So we have these thematic houses, we have our cruises, boats for events, discussions, networking throughout like the city of Belém. And there's this more concerted effort to really ensure strong representation of indigenous people. So we are seeing indigenous organizations trying to push not only the inclusion, but also like the co-leadership that we need and really influence over the COP agenda and outcomes. So I would point that priorities, I would say.
Thank you, Maria. Really, it's just been really interesting today to hear about the organizing and the mobilizing of civil society in Brazil. We only have a few minutes left today, but I want to just point out a comment/question in the chat, and maybe we can just spend a few minutes responding to it. So it's from Dina Z, who says, one of the more striking elements of this moment for me is we often talk about democratic backsliding by looking at how civil society groups navigated in moments of crisis. How would this conversation change if we were to more meaningfully pay attention to the lessons we could learn from civil society groups that have long operated in supposedly consolidated authoritarian regimes? There's just a little bit of time left, but I'm wondering, Marhi, like as a researcher of civil society, what do you think about this question?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. However, I would like to start with my response by saying that now that we are still in an early stage in countries like the US and the Netherlands, and maybe also some other contexts, then it's time to go all out, to build coalitions openly, to work together with opposition parties. That's really important. And not work from the position where there's hardly anything possible. But once things proceed, I think it is important to take more and more on these lessons, because indeed, as Dina is saying, a lot has been learned by civil society organizations in authoritarian and hybrid regimes, how to handle the situation in such a way that you can still do your work. And that can also be very meaningful for foundations. For example, one strategy has been shrouding your activities. So you start out under the radar, you build relations with certain state agencies. As you move forward, you can again then come up with some agenda points, do some mobilizing in the context of capacity development, for example. Also visibility management, so working from different platforms, handling possibilities of different financial constructions, for example, operating as a social enterprise rather than a civil society organizations. So a lot has also been learned about how to handle financial constrictions. And I think foundations can also really learn from that, and also then to be sensitive and aware to that and move along with the possibilities and really listen to organizations. That would be my advice to foundations and donors. Listen to pro-democracy movements and vulnerable groups, organizations, etc., to see what they would like from you, what they would like to see in terms of collaboration that is safe for them, that is supportive, and that may indeed be, needing flexibility. So an open mind, an open heart, and engagement, conversations, look them up, build connections, and based on that, adjust your activities.
Thank you so much. Glenn, Maria, do you have any sort of quick response to this?
I'll just say I want to agree with Maria. I think that the funders American funders need to spend now. And I'll agree with Margit. We need to spend now. There's $1.5 trillion sitting in private foundations and some unknown number of dollars sitting in donor-advised funds, which these are technical terms in the US for charitable tax shelters that rich people use. And they need to use it right now. And the part that Maria said that I really just want to emphasize is this can't be just a time of funding in crisis. It needs to be a consistent and ongoing effort. The fact that we go in and out and provide funding to democracy and human rights groups in and out of crisis is very destabilizing to movements. And funders need to stay in it for the long game and do more than the minimum 5% that's required in the United States. That's what I strongly believe. And need, that if we can do that, I think we get away from so much of the lack of coordination otherwise I think we're seeing right now.
Thanks, Glenn. Maria, any final remarks?
Oh, super quick. I just wanted to end up wrapping up with some positive message. I think it's trying to summarize what I already said. I think it's really important to fund really core long-term infrastructure, not just projects. Really trust local leadership, and by funding unrestricted and locally led initiatives, really, I think it's important also to support this more horizontal organizing and collective structures. Don't forget about de-risking the frontline leadership, so fund security, legal defense, these safety mechanisms, safety nets, and really promote this more participatory grant making, so you can amplify and really echo the voices that are doing a great work in the local level, and try to build these feedback loops and accountability to fund a way not only, as Glenn already said, to prevent, to protect, and to respond.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all three of you for joining us today and sharing your comments. It's been a really engaging and interesting conversation, and I've learned a lot. Thank you to our audience members. I hope you've enjoyed today's discussion as much as I have. If you found it helpful and engaging and you want to come back to it, we are going to be sending around a recording of the event in the next week or so. If you found it helpful, also make sure you're subscribed to Alliance. We'll be sending you a discount code so you can get an offer. And yeah, I'd like to end by saying thank you to our expert panelists. Thank you to the Alliance team for producing today's event. Thank you to everyone for being a part of the Alliance community today. And our next event will be next week. It's about AI and tech, and it's sponsored by Luminate. So make sure you're signed up to our mailing list so you don't miss the invite. See you next time. Bye.